Howdy, guys, and welcome to Cliff Notes. This is the amazing race, a recap of episode 8. The mega episode is how it was described. For those of you who may not remember last week's episode, just a real quick refresher. We had the 7 teams competing in Kazakhstan, cold, freezing cold Kazakhstan. However, the dating couple of Leo and Alana came in last place. They were eliminated. So now we only have 6 teams left competing for that $1 million prize. So the teams are all trading in the freezing cold of Kazakhstan for the more tropical environments of Hyderabad, India. Yes, indeed. I always love when the racers go to India because of the crowds, the traffic, the confusion. It just always makes for exciting racing while they're there. Plus, some of the cultural stuff they do and everything is always cool, too. So I always get excited when they're going to India. Now we got 2 hours of them in the country, so it ought to be a lot of fun. Now, I've been to India. I've never been to Hyderabad. I've been to Mumbai instead. Let me just show you a little souvenir I got from the last time. This is Kelly. I bought it for my daughter, Kelly. I thought it was pretty cool. Kelly in India. Just cool little souvenir I wanted to show off to y'all. But yeah, I've been to Mumbai a few times, never been to Hyderabad. But yes, Mumbai is every bit as crowded as it appears that Hyderabad is as well. Traffic is just horrific. Did y'all know, I did a little research because I don't know that much about the city. They describe it as the cyber capital, the cyber city of India, but it's also a huge city. Did you know with a population of over 10 million people, it's the 35th largest city in the world. It's bigger than every city in the United States except for New York and Los Angeles. So it's just a huge, gigantic, colossal sized city. And our racers have to compete inside of it with all kinds of challenges as we're going to see as we go forward. So let's talk about the first challenge. It's a quick taxi ride to the side of a busy road. Yeah, no more beaches like they had in Trinidad, no more salt mines in Colombia or fancy rivers in Brazil and all that. They stop at the side of a busy road, they hop out, and it turns out that they have to conduct smog checks on 3 separate auto-rickshaws. Now, auto-rickshaws, they're also called tuk-tuks and different terms, but they're the little 3-wheeled vehicles that are very popular in India. You see them in other parts of the world as well. But incredibly popular in India itself. Now, I tried during some of my visits to India, I tried to ride one of these auto rickshaws, and I was forbidden for safety reasons. I was told that wasn't going to happen, but I was certainly around enough of them to know how noxious their exhaust can be. So if the Indian government's trying to cut some pollution with some smog checks, props to the Indian government for doing it. But the racers have to do smog checks on 3 of these vehicles. The testing itself didn't seem to be that hard. You had to pull a vehicle over. You had to enter some basic vehicle identification information, stick a sensor up the tailpipe. Makes me think of Eddie Murphy, the banana in the tailpipe. But no, this is just a sensor in the tailpipe. And then they measure it, gives a certificate to the rickshaw, auto rickshaw, and then they're on their way. So the testing wasn't that hard, but getting the vehicles to stop, now that's a whole nother ballgame. That seemed a little difficult for all of our racers. A lot of these auto rickshaws seem to already have passengers, so obviously they didn't want to stop. But I also wonder if these drivers, they just don't want to have to pull over and go through the hassle of a smog check. I know I wouldn't be in a hurry if some random people were just standing on the side of the road and wanted to pull my car over to do some kind of inspection in the middle of nowhere. So I get why the drivers aren't perhaps wanting to pull over as well. But we do see a lot of our racers having a hard time getting the auto rickshaws to actually pull over. Eventually, we see them just standing in the middle of the road, basically trying to get some of these auto rickshaws to pull over. That seems like it's the safest challenge that we've seen this season because there's a lot of horn hockey. There's a lot of cars going all different ways. I think the volleyball players describe it as organized chaos. Yeah, I don't know how organized it is, but it's certainly chaos. But they start pulling over the vehicles to do the checks. And we find out or we see that as we've seen in past, there's an alliance of 5. We've got 6 teams left. 5 of those teams are in this alliance. They call it the Mine 5 that formed back in Colombia. The one team that isn't part of the alliance that's still left is Haley and Kalen. But we're starting to see more and more cracks form in this alliance. We saw it earlier in Berlin. We saw it in Kazakhstan. We see it again here. We see Gary and D'Angelo get upset because Riley and Madison, the volleyball players, have pulled over 2 auto rickshaws at the same time. And they're saying, no, Gary and D'Angelo are saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. Well, there's no rule that says you can't do it. But again, we're starting to see some cracks form. This alliance isn't going to last much longer. Let's see if it lasts through this episode even. We'll see here in a little bit. But eventually we do see all the teams compete the challenge itself. And once again, Haley and Kaylin, the one group with the one team that's not part of this alliance, we see them finish the challenge last. And when they get in the cab, they get lost. They have a driver who either does not speak English or just does not want to speak to them. They're just sitting, they're trying to talk to the driver. Driver's not saying a word, and they're feeling very helpless at that point in time, just hoping they can get to the next challenge. But again, they're already in last place. So Haley and Kaylin are just having bad luck, and it's going to get worse. All right, so let's talk about the first detour that all the teams have to compete in. Two options they can choose. They can either deliver food with the help of a person who's on a telephone looking at maps of the city and giving them directions over the phone. It's kind of a weird type of Uber Eats. I didn't realize when they first talked about it that they weren't in a vehicle. They actually are just walking, running to where they have to deliver the food. But again, they've got a person giving them directions. So that's the first option. The other option is to go to a technology center, stand in front of a kind of virtual screen, play a type of video game where you wave your hands to block off numbers of 1 and 0 that are showing up on a screen full of different numbers. You have to block them all off, or you have to do it again. But eventually when you complete it, then you get a whole binary code, a list of all these 1s and 0s, lines and lines of this binary code, which you then use to decode a message that tells you where to go for your first clue. It doesn't seem like a horrible challenge as long as you've got a little dexterity to block out the right numbers. And then it's just having the patience to decode the message to find out where you need to go. Now, I'm for choosing the video game, the binary code decoding every single time if they give me an option. It doesn't sound that hard. And the idea of having to follow directions all over this little part of Hyderabad and while trying to get instructions over the phone and delivering food, that just sounds miserable. I'd rather be indoors than in the high-tech area trying to do the messages. And it seems like everyone is doing the same thing. Everyone's going for the video game, except for Haley and Kaylin, the blonde sisters. Again, they're lost. They just happen to pass by the plaza where the Uber Eats, I think they call it Swiggy or something, I can't remember now, but the food delivery service, they just happen to see that. So they said, well, we're here. Let's just do that one instead. Also, hung and cheap. They have a hard time with the binary code challenge, the video game. They don't even get to the coded message. They just can't quite get their hands to coordinate to block off the correct numbers. I think they tried 10 or 11 times and never could complete the video game part to get this coded message. So eventually they give up. Now, giving up and going from one detour to another is always a dangerous strategy because it could really put you behind everyone else. They're fortunate that Haley and Kaylin are so far behind that they still do the food delivery service and complete it before Haley and Kaylin. But again, all but those two teams are doing the binary code instead. Now, the food delivery, as it turns out, isn't actually that bad. They listen to the directions. It's not too horrible. Once or twice they get a little confused, but nothing terrible. And it seems like both those teams finish without major issues. Now, talking about food in India a little bit, again, I've been there. I love the food there. It's incredible. But most of it was certainly very spicy and a little different spice than I'm used to here in Texas. I remember everything was so spicy. At one point I said, I'm going to get something just completely different. So I ordered a pizza from Pizza Hut that they have over there and had that delivered to me at the office I was working at. When it was delivered, it's a pizza with chicken topping. I opened it up, took a bite. It was coated with curry seasoning everywhere. So it had the same flavor that I'd been eating all week long. It's really good. I need to try it again here at home. But yeah, the food is amazing in India, but a lot of spices if you've never tried it. So with that being said, let's talk back about the race itself. So the next leg of the race, they have to go to a mausoleum, a giant, ancient, not fortress, burial site, tombs. But before they actually get to the challenge within that mausoleum, we've got another yield box. Now, Will and James are the first to arrive, and they end up yielding Haley and Kaylin. Oh, poor Haley and Kaylin. They just have the worst luck this episode. Now, two things I thought about when I saw them yielding them. First, I thought they had already used their yield in Brazil. I didn't realize that Will and James still had a yield to use. But then I look back and I realized that what they did last time wasn't a yield. They actually U-turned the father-son duo back in Brazil. So it wasn't a yield. They still had their hourglass, and so they had one left to use in this episode, and they use it again on Haley and Kaylin. They explained that it would make their alliance mad at them if they targeted anyone other than Haley and Kaylin. And since Haley and Kaylin used their yield last episode on Leo and Alana, even if Haley and Kaylin survive this episode, they can't use their yield on, they can't get back at Will and James in case they survive. So it makes sense why they used it on Haley and Kaylin. But there's a part of me that wonders if this might have been a perfect time to try and take out a stronger team. Yeah, I know they don't want to make the rest of the alliance mad, but they're already talking about that Gary and D'Angelo especially aren't really a core part of what they consider to be that alliance. They could have gone after those two guys, and yeah, it's a little more risky, but they could have taken out a strong team. I don't think anyone at this point in time is thinking that Haley and Kaylin are the big threat to win the whole thing. So they kind of took the easy road, of the easy route. I get it. I'm not saying I would have done differently, but they could have made a bold move by going after someone else. But moot point, because they didn't do it. They yield Haley and Kaylin. So the challenge itself was pretty cool. They have to use a tablet to find a virtual person on the underground section in the tombs, and it's a person wearing a turban. They have to remember the details of this turban, because then they have to go back up above the tombs. There's a lot of men wandering around wearing all different turbans. They have to find the person who's wearing the exact same turban as was on the virtual version down in the catacombs or the mausoleum, the tombs. And then they have to lead that person to the correct spot, the correct column above ground that matches where they were standing virtually below ground. Now, here's one thing. This is why I love The Amazing Race. They mention, and I had no clue about this, that the color, the style of turban that a person wears in India can be used to signify their caste, their position, their status in Indian society. I had no clue there was so much meaning behind these turbans, but apparently there is. Something I'd love to do a little research on in the future. Again, that's why I love The Amazing Race. The challenge itself, it doesn't sound too hard, and the matching seems easy enough. We have one or two teams, and they have to try it once or twice because they don't have it matched up quite right. But really, it doesn't seem that difficult as long as you're patient and you really take time to memorize what this turban looks like. But placement, a little bit difficult, especially for one team. Now, again, this is a challenge where only one person from each team competes. And for Will and James, it's James that's competing. And he has a major problem, not with the matching of the turbans, but with the placement above ground. He kept thinking the turban was wrong they picked, but that wasn't it. He was just one off in terms of which column he was putting the person on. So every time he was getting it wrong, getting really frustrated. I think he must have tried 10 times, 11 times. Seems like a lot of times before he got the first one correct. And the only reason, it seems like the main reason he got it correct was because Gary explained to him how he was looking out and using some markers outside the tomb area to make sure that he was placing his person on the right column. So he tells James how to do it. James immediately goes upstairs and matches the very next one. So thanks to Gary, James figured it out. Now, here's the question. Is James going to return the favor if he gets the chance? Again, they're both in this alliance of 5, but we've already heard Will and James and Riley and Madison both saying that Gary and D'Angelo probably aren't really part of the core group of 3, which is Gary, D'Angelo, Will, James, and Hung and Chi. So is he going to return the favor to Gary if he gets a chance? Well, we're going to find out a little bit later in the episode. So with that being said, the Blonde Sisters finally get to this challenge that they've been yielded, so they have to wait 20 minutes. Eventually, they get to complete the challenge, and they get it done. But again, because of the yield and because they were lost, had so many issues beforehand, they finish this challenge still in last place. Just getting yielded after everything else has happened is just adding insult to injury for these two, I believe. But eventually, all the teams complete it. So we're on to the next detour. Again, this is a mega episode, so we've got 2 detours going on this time instead of just one. I like the next detour. Well, kind of. I liked one of the 2. So they have to choose this or that. They don't know what the plans are, what the actual challenge is until they've made the selection. But they choose this or that. Turns out that the first option, they have to take a giant tray of bangles, of bracelets, all colored and gold and metals and everything, really cool looking. But they have to find a half dozen or so that match up to a woman, a bride-to-be, who's also wearing bangles on her arms. She's got the henna tattoos and everything. It's really cool. But anyways, they have to match it up. It's not a hard challenge, but this bin that they're having to go through is a huge bin loaded up with these bracelets. So you do have to have a power of recollection and patience and really looking for detail. It takes a little while, but eventually it seems like everyone gets it all right without a whole lot of options. Now, the other detour, that choice, if you make it, is miserable. The other option, you have to go to a little dentist and make a mold of a person's upper and lower teeth or gums. I don't know if they actually have teeth, because you're making a set of dentures for them. So you take the impression of the upper and lowers, and then the dentist adds the teeth onto it. And then the team person has to polish it all down and everything. And then they have to put it back into person and make sure it's a proper fit and everything. There's no way. I would absolutely hate this challenge. I think if I saw that, I would have immediately said, even if it takes a little extra time, I'm going over and doing the other challenge instead. It gave me the creeps to even watch him do it. But, you do what you have to do to compete. And we end up with Eswar and Aparna, Hung and Chi, and then later, Haley and Kaylin all do this challenge. And they're all very, very good at it. They don't seem to have any issues, so they just kind of get over the yuck factor and take the molds and put the dentures in and everything else. Phil does mention that these teeth that they're fixing for these people, you can buy them for about $3 US from the side of the road in these little markets. It makes me think, if I ever go back, if I ever visit Hyderabad, I'm getting some teeth, some fake teeth made for a couple of bucks. I'm gonna have them put all kinds of bling on it and everything else. I'll be shining to the world. But yeah, it was very interesting to watch that particular challenge. So with that, we now have all the teams headed to the final challenge, which takes place at Taj Falakatnuma Palace. Yeah, and I hope I pronounced that, but who knows if I did or not. Taj Falakatnuma Palace. But because this is a mega episode, before they actually do the challenge in the palace, just as with the mausoleum, we've got a final yield box. And the first team to get there is Riley and Madison, the professional volleyball players. They haven't used their yield yet, and this is the last opportunity for yield to be used. This is going to be the last episode with those hourglasses as an option. So they decide to go ahead and use their yield, a 20-minute yield, and they use the yield on, yes, indeed, Haley and Kaylin once again. Just horrible. I feel so bad for them. Talk about piling on. It kind of makes me wish that there was some kind of rule that maybe the same team couldn't be yielded twice. If you had something like that, I think you'd build that much more strategy into the game about do you or don't you use it and things like that. But those rules don't exist. They use it again on Haley and Kaylin. So once again, they're going to have another 20-minute yield when they reach this particular challenge. But we see once they use the yield, they actually get inside the palace. And we see that one person from each team must create a 10-person place setting exactly as set up in the example. And we're talking silverware and glasses and napkins that have to be folded all kinds of fancy ways and spaced out exactly, exact to the point that they use a ruler to make sure that it's only a certain width, a certain height, finger lengths from the edge of the table, very precise. It made me feel like I was watching an episode of Downton Abbey, the way they were so precise with these place settings. But kind of with the Bangles, it's just a matter of paying attention, and with the mausoleum and turbans as well. This whole episode has been all about paying attention to the details, not getting too rushed and making a mistake. So we see the team showing up and starting to do this particular challenge. Now, remember how Gary helped James in the mausoleum figure out the placement? Well, will James return the favor? No, not going to happen. Riley tells James about using the ruler to make sure that you've placed everything correctly. but both of them go out of their way not to tell Gary, not to pass that information on to him. James later also approaches Hung and tells her the same thing. Hey, you got to use a ruler or they'll call you on it. But they don't do it with Gary. Eventually, he sees them using rulers and he says, hey, do we have to use a ruler? And they kind of say, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. But it's very obvious they're going out of their way to not help Gary anymore. The Alliance of Five is gone. At this point, it's we can tell starting next week, it's not going to be a thing anymore. But we do see them working very hard to fold the napkins, get everything placed. And once that's complete, they get their final clue, which directs them to the location of Phil. And Phil and probably India's very worst rapper doing a Hyderabad. But they show up on the finish line and showing up first, Riley and Madison, the pro volleyball players. They find Phil first. And so they finished this, the mega episode. They finished in first place. Soon behind them, we see Will and James show up. Again, getting a little help from knowing the ruler, to use the rulers on to place things and everything else. In third place, we see Gary and D'Angelo show up. Hung and Chi show up in fourth place. Eshwar and Aparna show up in fifth. Now, I think they probably were a little bit disappointed. On the one hand, I'm sure they're glad that they didn't finish in last place. But we saw at the very beginning of the episode, Eshwar and Aparna said they were born in India. They were raised, they're both techies. So they figured a challenge in India using coding and things like that would just be up their alley. I'm sure they thought they were going to win this whole leg. So for them to finish fifth, I'm sure they're incredibly disappointed, but hey, they're still in the game. So Eshwar and Aparna finish in fifth. And way behind in sixth place are Haley and Kaylin. They're laughing while they're waiting for this 20-minute yield. They know how far behind they are, and they're taking it very very well. They talk about how they're bitter, but they're laughing and everything else. And sure enough, they are behind. We don't even know how far, but I would say it's an hour or more. It seems like a lot of time before they show up. And a few other times they finished in last place were non-elimination legs. Well, their luck has finally run out because sure enough, they are eliminated in this leg. With 2 yields used against them in a final episode, they really had no chance this time. They just this Alliance of Five finally just took them out, and they, even without the yields, it would have been difficult because we saw them in last place after a few challenges from the very beginning with Smog check. So Haley and Kaylin are eliminated. We're now down to 5 teams. Now, these are the 5 teams that formed that alliance in Colombia, so obviously there's no one else left to pick off except for the 5. We're seeing a little mini alliance formed, as I mentioned, Chung and he, Riley and Madison, and Will and James. So Eshwar and Aparna, and who am I leaving out? And Gary and D'Angelo are probably the 2 that aren't going to be getting a lot of help in the next episode. But we'll see. With 5 teams, can you really have much of an alliance with anyone? I don't think so. At this point in time, I think you've got to do whatever you can to finish first and try to get out any of the strong teams while you still can. But incredible episode. 2 hours in India is always a lot of fun, and this didn't let us down. Some fun challenges. We'll see where they travel next week and what happens now that we're down to 5 teams. Guys, y'all have a fantastic week. I will be back next Thursday to talk about the next episode of Amazing Race. Until then, safe travels. Y'all have a great one, guys. Cheers, my friends. Bye.